In a public key infrastructure, a certificate authority is responsible for creating and distributing certificates to the end users and the people that will be needing them in the environment. These are the public and the private keys. These are the ones that are also distributed out to servers. People use them on their end stations. Your CA is your central clearinghouse for all of that. If you're in a private organization, you may have your own certificate authority, one that you use internally for your internal users and your internal servers. There may be a situation where you would need to take those certificates and have them used by someone else. But in those cases, you would have to make sure that those third parties trusted your certificate authority, because if you're building your own CA in your own organization, nobody even knows about you. Those certificates are really important internally, but nobody can really trust them from an external source. So there's additional things you may have to do if third parties are starting to use them. In other cases, you might choose to use a public certificate authority for you to get your public and your private keys. For instance, if you had a web server, you may want to go to a known third party out these public CAs. This is a list of the public certificate authorities from inside of my browser, and you can see there are quite a few listed there. That's because those are already set up to be trusted by everyone's browser, so that I can go to any one of those CAs, get the certificates I need for my web server, and then they're automatically trusted by the browser I'm using. That's the whole idea of having this certificate authority. That's where that authoritative name comes from, is that if we can trust the CA and somebody goes to the CA to get a certificate and that's issued by the certificate authority, therefore I can also trust that certificate. And it makes this entire mechanism that we have for encrypted communications to our web servers be completely seamless to the end user. They know all of these CAs by default. You're using a certificate that was created by one of those. Therefore, we can be assured that that communication will be encrypted and there won't be any problem whatsoever. This certificate authority is a pretty important entity then, and there are a number of responsibilities associated with it. The first is to ensure that these certificates that we're using are valid. When somebody asks for registration from a certificate authority and a certificate is granted, you're therefore trusting the person that's receiving that certificate. You don't want someone else showing up and saying, "Hi, I'm Google, please give me a Google certificate," because then anybody would be able to pretend that they were Google. So these certificate authorities have to make sure during that registration process that the entire process that they go through is to check and make sure that the people that are signing up for this certificate are legitimate and that there aren't any problems. This doesn't always happen. There have been instances where certificates have been given to the wrong people, but it is a very rare occurrence when that happens. The certificate authorities are also responsible for managing all of these servers that store and distribute and administer those certificates. These are very, very big repositories, and obviously they are creating private keys, public keys that are extremely sensitive. You don't want somebody getting their hands on your private key. So you want to be sure, if you're a certificate authority, that everything that you're doing surrounding those capabilities is as secure as possible. And thirdly, a certificate authority has this entire key process that it has to keep in mind. There is a life cycle for these keys that you have to also administer. And the certificate authority is not only responsible for assigning keys, but it also has to make sure that keys that have expired are no longer good. And if there have been situations where an organization shuts down or keys have been distributed fraudulently, they have to revoke those keys, and there needs to be a big revocation list. We'll have a whole video about these revocation lists so that your certificate authority is managing it from the very beginning to the very end of that certificate generation process. If you're planning to build your own certificate authority, you might want to consider looking at RFC 2527. It's a standard framework that's set up for certificate authority so that you can decide how you would like to create the policies and the procedures for your particular CA. For example, there are different certificates you might get from a certificate authority. One would be perhaps a general purpose certificate. If you were just building a very simple website, you wanted some encryption certificates for that web server, you could get a general purpose certificate. And it may require that you fax some information in, that you fill out a form, that you scan some details and send it back to someone. There may be just a minor set of procedures that you go through so that you can prove that you are who you say you are and you can get a general purpose certificate. But you may find that that you need more than that. And some of the larger certificate authorities out there can give you a commercial grade certificate that requires a little bit more. You may have to meet somebody in person. You may have to provide additional documentation, something that would make sure that the things that you're providing to the CA can justify you are who you say you are. You can prove that to someone. And you may get a special rating, a higher assurance rating than just a generalized general purpose certificate. And you can put that on your website, and you can make sure that people understand you've gone through a little bit extra work, a few extra hoops to make sure that you can trust this particular web server because it's been checked out by your certificate authority.